And I'm Nate.
And welcome back to Rob and Nate Record a Podcast.
Well, it is November of 2021 that we're recording. November with Thanksgiving and other things. It's become a kind of a tradition not to do a theme month, but to just kind of do standalone shows. And the first one I selected, Rob did not know what it was until mere minutes before we started to watch the film. This is the 1976 classic Network, starring William Holden, Faye Dunaway, Peter Finch, and Robert Duvall. I think that it is a fantastic movie and have a good deal to say about it. But let's get first impressions from Rob.
The movie tells you everything that it's going to do. At various stages of the movie, it tells you, okay, here's what's going to happen, and it happens. And it's really well executed. It's really good. Part of me wants to say it was a little cynical for 1976.
A little.
But at the same time, mostly right.
Network is the rare satire that is more relevant now than when it first came out. It anticipated so much of what has happened in television in the forthcoming years. The blending of the entertainment and news divisions of the networks, reality television, mad prophets of the airway, of which we have too many nowadays. It was a very forward-looking film, and it is sharp and cynical, beautifully written. It contains some of the best monologues in the history of cinema, courtesy of the great Paddy Chayefsky, who wrote the screenplay. Chayefsky had a long career. He, kind of like another 1970s television figure, Norman Lear, who was, huge with All in the Family and Sanford and Son and all the different shows that he made. He started out, Chayefsky did, writing fairly straightforward-ish screenplays. He wrote The Americanization of Emily. He wrote Paint Your Wagon, which does have some cynicism to it. And then he kind of transferred into these really sharp social commentary films. He did a film called The Hospital in 1971 with George C. Scott, where George C. Scott plays a hospital administrator and somebody is killing patients in the hospital. And it's a satire about the medical establishment. Though before this film, he was probably best known for something he did for live television, the early days of television, called Marty, which premiered as I think it was a Playhouse 90 in 53, 54. And it was so well received that they made a feature film adaptation of it the next year, starring Ernest Borgnine, and that film won the Academy Award for Best Film of 1955. Paddy Chayefsky, brilliant guy. He's also well remembered for a very intelligent takedown he did, I think, of Vanessa Redgrave when she said some political things at the Oscars, and he was presenting next, and he just kind of laid into her. Brilliant screenplay. Like there's monologues in here that are just incredible. I don't want to read them because I can't do them justice. You should see the movie, go on IMDb, and read some of these monologues. They are fantastic. The film was directed by Sidney Lumet, another guy whose career goes back to, I think he started in television. He did the feature film 12 Angry Men. He did Dog Day Afternoon, The Verdict, Murder on the Orient Express. And then the cast, of course, is fantastic. William Holden of Sunset Boulevard, Picnic, The Wild Bunch, Peter Finch, who we'll get into more, Robert Duvall, and, of course, Faye Dunaway. Beatrice Straight, who has one long scene in the film. She plays William Holden's wife. That scene won her a Best Supporting Actress Oscar.
Really?
She shows up in some other film, some other scenes in the film, but she has the one long kind of speech.
Yeah.
She won an Oscar for that, for 4 or 5 minutes of screen time. And, of course, Ned Beatty delivers a wonderfully memorable monologue as the president of...
As Arthur Jensen.
Arthur Jensen, and the corporate cosmology of Arthur Jensen. He is the president of CCA, the Communications Corporation of America, which owns UBS, the United Broadcasting Systems, which starts this show as this film as the fictional fourth place network. and is engaged in a scheme to sell the CCA to the Saudi Arabian investment organization by way of the Western World Funding Corporation. There's a lot of business in this movie, and we should talk about the plot. Can you summarize the plot to network?
The IMDb plot overview is: a television network cynically exploits a deranged former anchor's ravings and revelations about the news media for its own profit, but finds that his message may be difficult to control. So you have Max Schumacher, played by William Holden, and Howard Beale, played by Peter Finch, who the start of this is set up by them, going to a bar.
The network has just fired Beale.
Getting ready to fire Beale.
Yeah,
he's going to be
2
off.
weeks
And,
left.
yeah. And they're at the bar, and he says something about he's going to announce that he's going to kill himself on live TV for the ratings. And then he proceeds to do that.
And when he says that, half jokingly, William Holden's character starts saying, well, that would kill ratings-wise. I mean, you get a 50 share. And just kind of going off this not seriously. And Beale takes this to heart. And there's that wonderful scene where he's supposed to take a few moments on the broadcast to say, I'm going to retire in 2 weeks. And he says, I'm being canceled because of low ratings. I'm a childless widower. This was the only thing in my life I had going for me. So I'm going to kill myself on the show next Tuesday. I almost feel like we should have put a little content warning on this episode. But he's going to do this next Tuesday, and that should give the network publicity people time to sell the show.
The public relations division enough time to publicize the event.
And nobody in the room, the control room, is paying much attention to what he's saying. They're having other conversations, and it's only after they go to commercial that said, what did Howard just say?
Yeah.
Howard just said he's going to kill himself.
So then he's allowed to go back on the air the next night, assuming that he's going to go back to normal. And he goes off on a rant, and talks about how the network politics and what's happening is,
bull.
Yeah.
And how he's
giving me a reason to test my bleeping.
How he's run out of bull.
Yeah.
He just doesn't have any more bull. And he, of course, was let back on for the sole purpose of doing a little, I'm sorry, that was an appropriate thing to try to rescue the situation. But he goes off script again.
Max Schumacher, played by William Holden, is in that moment fed up with the network himself because of a thing that's been announced at a shareholders meeting.
He was blindsided by the idea that they're going to fold his division into programming, into the entertainment division.
And so he lets Howard Beale do this rant on the air. So he's fired or quasi-fired. I mean, he's hired back, the next day?
Yeah.
But Diane Christensen, Faye Dunaway, takes this moment and decides this is her moment to pounce.
She's the new programming lady at the network.
Yeah. And, it comes up with this idea that Howard Beale is going to be the mad prophet, and anyways, it leads into the preceding plot of the movie. Max Schumacher is eventually fired. Faye Dunaway, Diana Christensen does make him the mad prophet, starts trying to put together these other ideas to mix programming and news, and it's initially met with quite a bit of success, and then basically what they've done to everyone else turns around and happens to them. I was going to ask you, what is the time frame of this movie?
So the first scene in the movie is they give an exact date, which I think I had written down, but it's September the 23rd, 1975.
And then how long does the movie span?
Into June, July of 76, summer of 76.
Okay. So not a tremendous period of time for, this is all rapidly unfolding, this rise and fall.
Yeah. And because it's set in a very specific time frame, the news stories and stuff that kind of sprinkle throughout are the actual news of that period.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Eventually, they lose control of what Howard Beale is spewing on the TV. It gets too close, and so he's brought in to Arthur Jensen's office, played by Ned Beatty. And as you mentioned, Ned Beatty has this great monologue, basically where he's taking Howard Beale's shtick and flips it around on him to convince him to go a different direction.
Beale had been against these corporate mergers, and Jensen convinced him this is how the world works. This is the ecology of the world now is fiscal. There are no countries. There are no peoples. There are corporations.
The corporations are the peoples.
Yes.
Very prescient today. Yeah.
Anticipating Mitch by a number of decades.
Yeah.
I mean, this film has a lot to say. It's just so sharp.
Well, and that relationship between Max Schumacher and Diana Christensen is also interesting.
Yeah.
And again, they telegraph everything that's going to happen in that relationship. He tells his wife, well, it's going to play out like one of her scripts. This is what's going to happen, and then this is what's going to happen. And that's exactly what happens.
There's an element of generational conflict to the film, and in its critique of television. So Holden's character was there at the beginning. He was a 26-year-old producer at CBS in 1950, and he tells that story about being woken up. You're supposed to be at our live shoot at the work being done on the George Washington Bridge. So he puts on his trench coat, on his pajamas, runs downstairs, hails a cab, take me to the middle of the George Washington Bridge. Don't do it, fella. You're a young man. Your whole life's ahead of you. He tells this story twice in the film. And so he was there at the beginning, and he's known a world without television. Whereas Faye Dunaway, and Faye Dunaway was born in 1941, really probably haven't. And he says, she's talking to his wife about the trajectory of this ill-advised romance, which everybody involved knows is ill-advised. But, he's 23 years older than Faye Dunaway, and she's Faye Dunaway. He couldn't say no. There's the first time they go out, he's like, you schmuck, what are you getting yourself into? But says she's television generation. I don't know if she can really feel anything. And the scene where they go on their romantic weekend, and during the various love making to one degree or another, all she is talking about is programming, and she's talking about it in the voice of erotic rapture the entire time. That's what's turning her on.
All the way through erotic rapture.
Through. Yeah. It's quite the performance.
Yeah.
It did not win an Oscar, but somebody else did for this film.
Okay.
Peter Finch. Peter Finch or Howard Beale.
Howard Beale.
Yeah, it's a great performance. Peter Finch had been around for a long time. He was in many films. He was in Sunday Bloody Sunday. He was in The Nun Story, in which he ironically co-starred with Beatrice Straight, Mrs. Schumacher, in this film. Yeah, and Audrey Hepburn. Well, I said The Nun Story is a tragic film because it's about Audrey Hepburn becoming a nun. But Peter Finch, this would have been the start of a career resurgence for him had he not dropped dead from a heart attack on the 14th of January 1977, the day after appearing on The Tonight Show to promote the film.
Wow.
But he won that posthumous Oscar and was the last to win it until Heath Ledger did in the 2009 ceremony.
Wow. Yeah.
What did you... So
we're also here overshadowing completely that Robert Duvall's in this film.
Yeah, he's one of the suits.
Yeah.
Well, the suit Robert Duvall performance.
His character name is Frank Hackett. He wants to take over CCA, basically. But he's got to first push aside...
Ned Beatty.
Well, no, but the guy he pushes aside before...
Oh, yeah. The So some of these titles are kind of... Because there's there's the president of the network, and there's the chairman of the board, and there's the head of program. And so there's these titles that all sound like they should be at about the same level, but there's intricacies that may not be...
Well, it's the current head of the network.
Yeah,
he's got to push him aside, but he's the president of CCA, or whatever. And so he has to push him aside to be able to take over, but he has a heart attack. So Robert Duvall's Frank Hackett is able to take over, and is able to then put Diana Christensen, played by Faye Dunaway, into the position to do all the things that she needs to do, But then, again, the flip side of this is that everything that they're doing to somebody else turns around and happens to them, in, again, a very short period of time. So he's there present for basically the falling apart of the network, because this mad prophet that they've put in place from Howard Beale, he eventually, like, they're on the West Coast one night at a convention, and Howard Beale has aired this show. He's recorded this segment, and it's already aired on the East Coast, and it's this ranting against the mergers with the Saudis, and you watch Frank Hackett, just as it starts to air, he starts getting the phone calls.
I was a golden boy a few hours ago. Now I'm a man without a network.
Yeah, and his career's destroyed, and he has to catch a red eye back to New York to deal with the fallout from this the next day. And yeah, it's interesting.
The surreal conceit of this is a man who, as Schumacher says at one point, I think you're having a breakdown. Howard Beale has been his friend for 20 years, his best friend, he says.
And he is having a breakdown.
And he is. And the network is exploiting it for ratings.
Yeah. I mean, he gets up off of Schumacher's couch in his pajamas, throws on a raincoat, and walks all the way back into town to the network, and is put on the air in his pajamas in a raincoat.
Yeah. Because he wants to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times.
Yeah.
And that speech he gives, the famous "I'm mad as hell, I'm not going to take it anymore" speech, you must have been on some level familiar with that speech.
Yep.
That is fantastic. That might be the greatest speech in the history of film. It's top 10, top 5 maybe even. It's fantastic. And they cut to William Holden at home with his wife, and his daughter is just about to go off to college. She's got a older daughter who's never seen but referred to a few times, a married daughter, referred to a few times in the film. But Howard Beale comes off the street looking haggard in a wet coat and possibly pajamas, and starts going off on this, everything's horrible. It's the middle 1970s. I don't know how to fix it, but I know the first thing we need to do is we need to get up out of our chairs, go to the window, and scream, "I'm mad as hell."
And tell the world.
Yeah. Tell the world that we'll figure it all out, but first we need to tell that this is just not an acceptable state of affairs. And William Holden's daughter, like, "I'm going to open the windows. I want to see if anybody's yelling." And people do. And I love the scene. All these people sticking their heads out of these kind of high-end New York City apartments. And we cut, of course, to Faye Dunaway calling the network affiliates. Are they screaming in Kansas City? They're screaming in Baton Rouge.
Are they
They're
screaming
yelling
in Atlanta?
Yeah. And that becomes basically the catchphrase, because when the Howard Beale show is re-engineered into a very gaudy format, that's what everybody cheers to Howard Beale as they get ready for him to come on stage to give his daily rant, each of which ends with him collapsing on the stage, seemingly unconscious.
Yeah. I asked multiple times in this film, did Howard Beale just have a stroke? Like from the way he collapses and things. And yeah, it's interesting because there is a moment kind of in the middle of the film where our Diana Christensen character is talking to Max Schumacher, and they're proposing this show where it's going to be hosted by a communist, but they're going to air footage recorded by
the Ecumenical Liberation Army.
Yeah.
This is a satire on things like the Symbolize Liberation Army and their kidnapping of Patty Hearst.
Yeah.
And so they have another group that also kidnapped an heiress and that filmed a bank robbery with that heiress.
Yeah.
And that footage ends up with the news division that wants to do a special with it. Diana Christensen sees it and says, "This isn't a special, this is a series."
Yeah.
We get this group to film crimes, and then we write a fictional story around it, and we air it weekly.
Well, but again, this movie telegraphs a lot of things that are going to happen. She is having this, in part of her rant with Max Schumacher, she's talking about how the FBI wants the tape and this and that and the other, and how they're inducing a felony. Because they're going to pay this group for their content, for their tapes, but they need to make more shows, so they're paying them, in essence, to go and create more tapes, And then later on in the movie, they literally are hiring this group to assassinate Howard Beale on TV.
Yeah. Spoiler. Cast.
And they're talking about, they mention in the meeting that they're inducing a felony. They're inducing capital murder. And she's talked about previously earlier in the film how they're inducing a felony.
Frank, I hope you don't have any hidden recording systems in this office.
Yeah.
Because we're about to talk about
inducing a felony.
Inducing a felony.
And yeah, so again, this movie telegraphs a lot of things that are going to happen repeatedly, and then they happen, and you're both surprised and not surprised.
So it is a fantastic film. It is a film that I try to see about once every presidential term. And it's just each time it gives you something. Like each time it is relevant.
You can see echoes of this in a lot of other things. You can see it in The Joker. You can see elements of this in Newsroom. You can see elements in this, and a lot of different things that we've talked about. Not necessarily always on the podcast, but we've talked about for a long time. I think, I've long said Newsroom has some of the best monologues.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
This is, at least as good as many of those. So,
and what's interesting is the spectrum that they cover between things having to do with corporate philosophy and the general malaise of the 1970s to interpersonal relationship things. I mean, it's kind of overshadowed by the Howard Beale storyline, but the William Holden storyline of that midlife crisis, I mean, that's a really excellent portrayal of how somebody, Faye Dunaway, is interested in me. I'm 23 years older than her. This is stupid, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Yeah.
And that scene with his wife, that confrontation, but at the same time, they both know we're going to be back together. And this bizarre, I don't know, this is just fantastic. It's just so incredibly well written, well acted, well directed by Sidney Lumet. It's simultaneously super contemporary. It's a very 1970s film, but it's super relevant to the ensuing decades. This is a film that I thought of often during the 2016 presidential election.
Yeah.
But yeah, I am going to give this film 4 stars and 10 out of 10.
I'm pretty close. I think I'm going to go 4 and 9. It does get just a little bit long towards the end.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's hard to think of outside of it getting a little long. It's hard to critique anything in this movie. For a 1976 film to be this relevant today, again, it's hard to critique. So for me, it's 4 and 9. It's a great film.
Stupendous film. It did lose the Oscar Best Picture. It was nominated, but it lost to Rocky. And it's hard to hold anything against Rocky.
Yeah. So it was nominated for... It was a winner for Best Actor in a Leading Role. Winner for Best Actress in a Leading Role.
Dunaway did win.
Winner for Best Actress in a Supporting Role. Winner for Best Writing, Screenplay written directly for the screen, or as what we would know now today as Original Screenplay. It was a nominee for Best Picture, nominee for Best Actor in a Leading Role.
For William Holden.
Nominee for Best Actor in a Supporting Role for Ned Beatty. Nominee for Best Director for Sidney Lumet. Nominee for Best Cinematography for Owen Roizman, and nominee for Best Film Editing for Alan Haim.
And while it did not deserve a nomination for music, I did like the music, and I liked that it's 1970s television music. The Howard Beale Show theme is running through my head right now.
Yeah? Well, we did listen to it extra times.
Yeah.
Box office, this had an estimated budget of $3.8 million. It had a domestic gross of $23.6 million. I'm not seeing what appears to be an accurate worldwide gross, but clearly made a decent amount of money, especially for 1976. This has on IMDb, it has an aggregate score of 8.1 stars, which is low for this film. This should be at least a 9-star film on IMDb. I'm seeing on IMDb a Metacritic score of 83.
Rotten Tomatoes score of 92%.
That seems pretty accurate.
Who didn't like that work?
How does it only have...
8% of critics didn't like it.
Yeah. How does it only have 8.1 stars on IMDb? People need to Yeah.
Yeah, it might be. I mean, it's not an easy pill to swallow. I mean, it is as prescient as it is a very 70s film in pacing and in just the general seriousness of the subject. As a viewing experience, how surprised were you? Did you kind of you talked about how everything's kind of telegraphed, and it kind of is.
Well, but
as this film started, what did you think you were getting?
There was... I was going to say there was echoes of movies like The Paper, but this precedes those, so they're not echoes. It's like the other way around. Even though it's telegraphed, like things are telegraphed, like you're like, well, they're not going to tell you what they're going to do and then turn around and do it, but they do. Yeah, I wasn't exactly sure where it was going to go, and then when Howard Beale does his first spiel on the TV, I was like, oh no.
Yeah.
And I thought that, like, it's if you come into this blind, it's not possible to predict exactly where this movie's going.
And it's satire, and it gets to be wider as it goes on, but it's played really straight for the first half hour, first hour. The early scenes I'm thinking of when they're in the offices and they're dealing with the crisis situation, and they haven't done the crazy thing of like, let's go with it. I mean, it feels like it could be over in 40 minutes. It feels like, okay, and then we had to do this and get Howard some help, and then it was all over. But they take. I mean, it could have been like an episode of a television show, some kind of anthology show. But they add that whole second half where it gets bigger than life. Yeah.
Just one piece of trivia I wanted to share based on something you keep saying. Director Sidney Lumet and screenwriter Paddy Chayefsky claimed that this film was not meant to be a satire, but a reflection of what was really happening.
Scary stuff.
Yeah. Because you've said multiple times that this is a satire, and they're saying it's not intended to be a satire. So, and it doesn't...
that might be a satirical comment.
In today's world, it doesn't necessarily feel entirely like a satire.
No. As I said before, it anticipated a lot of what happened to television in the ensuing decades.
Yep. Well, anything else on this one?
No, highly recommend.
This is great. So, yeah, I'm Rob.
And I'm Nate.
And this is Rob and Nate Record a Podcast.
I love me 1970s television. I do. I love it. I love All in the Family. I love Policewoman. I love the freaking Dick Cavett show. I could just watch, like, if there was a channel that just stream what was on ABC this day in 1974, I'd watch it.
I thought there was that. And I thought you did watch it.
In my dreams.
No, don't you watch something like that on YouTube?
You can get a lot of this older stuff on YouTube.
Yeah.
I love 1970s TV movies, especially with David Jansen. I'll watch any David Jansen
and
TV
as long
movie.
as they've got the real, like, the actual commercials in them, right?
I prefer the actual commercials, yes.
Yeah. I didn't get into a lot of the trivia because, like, I felt like we were too on time. So I'm going to read a few things and then I might edit them out. Faye Dunaway would later say that this was the only film I ever did that you didn't touch the script because it was almost as if it was written in verse. She was happy with Sidney Lumet as the writing, describing him as one of, if not the most talented and professional men in the world. In the rehearsals, 2 weeks before shooting, he blocks his scenes with his cameraman. Not a minute is wasted while he's shooting, and that shows not only in the studio's budget, but in the impetus of performance. Peter Finch was desperate to win the role of Howard Beale. Once he had read the script, he even offered to pay his own airfare to New York City for the screen test. But Sidney Lumet was concerned about Finch's Australian accent. Finch won the part after sending Lumet a recording of himself reading the New York Times with a perfect American accent.
I would listen to that recording.
Yeah, you mentioned Beatrice Straight. Hers was the briefest performance ever to win an Oscar.
Well, it couldn't have been nominated for Best Score because the only music heard in the film comes from commercials and television show themes.
Yeah, great film. This was fun tonight. Thank you for a solid pick. I guess I cannot pick something to intentionally piss you off, as I've been joking. So I guess that rules out Lamageddon. I'm going to make you watch Lamageddon at some point. You need to finish that. No. Anyways, this is a long argument between you and I about Lawmageddon.
Velocipaster's better.
It's not. Lawmageddon was better.
This is honestly probably our biggest disagreement on any issue.
Lawmageddon was everything that Velocipaster should have been. Anyway,
Lawmageddon's a pale imitation of Velocipaster.
You didn't even finish it. You can't say that. I can't believe that we're legitimately arguing about Lawmageddon and Velocipaster.
Yeah. Semi-regularly.
Well, this is what? 5 times in 2 weeks?
Probably, yeah.
All right. And then...
There's nothing you're going to say tonight that we have to run by standards and practices first, right? It's TV humor.
Yeah.
Vintage TV humor.